How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. My name is Chad, and with me is Erik, whose beard is approaching ZZ Top territory.
Yeah, so is my career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have some guests with us this week, and they are all of us are former 411 podcast alum. I don't know if we should call each other alum. I don't know what we graduated from, but we all did the 411 Mania Movie Zone podcast together. We are missing our friends George and Will, but hopefully we'll have them on the show in the future. So we'll start out with Mr. Jeremy Thomas. Jeremy, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm Jeremy Thomas. I am writer, editor, etc. for 411 still, and doing good. Looking forward to this.
All right. And we have Leonard, who also does the Nitty Gritty with me, obviously.
Yes, that is the primary thing I was going to mention. I'm doing some freelance stuff. I'm a journalist here in Ohio, and I got to thank Chad for getting me back into doing something like this, pop culture related. And of course, if you haven't checked out the Nitty Gritty here on YouTube as well, please be sure to do that. Our last episode, we talked about PM news for more than a half hour, believe it or not.
Wow.
The hits are off the charts with that video. It's tough to even count them. And so last but not least, we have Mr. Tony Farinella. Tony, how are you doing?
Great. First time watcher, a long time listener.
All right. So we're going to start off here by talking about our favorite horror movie heroes or heroines. You often see columns or videos or podcasts about horror villains, but we figured we would talk about the heroes and heroines this time around. And I'm sure we will not mention them all. If anybody wants to comment or give their feedback on ones that we didn't talk about, absolutely go ahead. I don't know how many people are going to be watching this, but who knows? We can't blame Ashish for it this time. So we'll.
We just need to have very controversial opinions to get people to watch.
Right.
And boobs.
Yeah. So we'll start off by saying what makes a good horror movie hero or heroine. So, you guys can kind of give me your feedback too, but to me, obviously the person has to be strong to a certain extent. But one of the things that I was thinking about was that you have to balance. There has to be somebody that balances the smart decisions with the dumb ones. If the person comes off too cocky, you might not like them. If the person comes off as an idiot, obviously that's not somebody we can connect to. What do you guys think? Is there any quality that you usually look for when you're watching a horror movie?
I think the key is, for me, whether they make good decisions or bad decisions, or who they are in terms of background, is that they have agency in the story. If somebody doesn't have any agency at all, is just sort of being maneuvered around, and by the end they sort of just luck into the whole thing and happen to survive, it doesn't work for me. And then, of course, yes, generally making smarter decisions as opposed to really, really bad ones helps.
Right.
I would say capability, being useful. There's one of the final girls, quote unquote, the final girls on my list that I would say, that we'll get to, who I would say is the most capable, and that's why I put her on my list. But it's like I've always, when asked to go in a different genre, so I don't spoil anything, when asked like, who's the best Bond girl? I often say Michelle Yeoh from Tomorrow Never Dies, because she's so capable. I mean, she is as experienced and as skilled as James Bond. So that's why I like, horror hero is someone who has that capability. And I should say also someone who grows over the course of either the film or the franchise. When we get to the worst, the guy at the top of my list regressed as the franchise went on. So I like to see that growth as well from a character.
Sure, absolutely. And, it would have been cool to see Michelle Yeoh have a spinoff. Like, they wanted to do one with Halle Berry's character, but I hated that Bond movie. But
yeah, that was,
it's awful.
Not to go off on a tangent, but that Bond movie, when it came out, Like everyone was like, "Oh, this is pretty good," and then it was like a week, and everyone went, "No, no, it isn't."
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I was going to say all you guys made really good points. Say, it has to be somebody that we can relate to a certain extent, even if we don't relate to them, we understand them, even if we don't necessarily agree with everything that they do, right? So,
I was going to add also, sorry, Chad, real
Yeah.
quick, if I can jump in. A level of vulnerability, I think, is important for a horror hero. So I'd say vulnerability. You guys touched on smartness and tough. Like, you want someone that there's a little bit of a chance they might not make it out. So that's why I really want to hone in on vulnerability, because as you said, if they're too cocky or too tough, it's like, nothing's going to happen to them. But if there's a little bit of vulnerability or a little bit of doubt, keeps the audience guessing all the way until the end.
Right. Absolutely. And you were talking about if there's a chance that the person might not make it out, which will lead into our first pick. So we'll start off. We'll eventually do a show here on our worst ideas, our worst horror movie heroes. But so I'll start off with my pick as my favorite, which is probably a popular one, but I would have to say it is Ashley Williams. Now, I should add before I get into this, we haven't talked about these picks, so we don't know if any of us have doubled up or any of that. So we'll see what happens. But I would have to say Ash would be my favorite horror movie hero. And while I was thinking about why that is, I was thinking that it's almost too easy to pick him because some of the other more popular horror movie heroes or heroines, like they have like an equally as popular or notable villain to go up against. And he doesn't really have that. He's the star. He's the focal point. You have, obviously he destroys a lot of things, but there's not a Leatherface. There's not Michael Myers, not really anyway. But what I like about him is one of the things that you mentioned, Tony, is that, you not sure he might not make it out. And I relate a lot to him, because of the fact that, he sometimes makes poor decisions. Sometimes he gets the crap beat out of him. And, that can be a really enjoyable part of those movies. And, I would say over the series of movies and even the show, we've seen him grow. And obviously, he's a really cool character, right? That's one of the things that comes to mind for me first is, he has a lot of one-liners and, just the way he carries himself as a confident person, but, there's also a little bit of dumbness there. And, but, he's also like a little bit of underlying, lovability, I guess is a word that I'm making up now. But yeah, so that's my pick. Any thoughts on Ash?
I mean,
Well, as I mentioned, the growth factor, and you do get that with him throughout the course of the films. He is way different from the first movie to Army of Darkness, which is more of a horror comedy,
Right.
and the TV show I loved, which is also more of a horror comedy. So, and he develops and he grows with that. And I think Bruce Campbell, I know we're talking characters, but at least in my mind, the actor playing the character has a lot to do with it.
Oh, absolutely.
And with the case of Bruce Campbell, perfect marrying of characters, character to actor, especially as that progression happened. You see a lot of Ash and Bruce Campbell in Ash. There he is right there, and there's the Evil Dead poster behind me, so you can tell we're all fans.
Right.
I've got my statue around here.
Yeah, no,
too.
absolutely. Yeah, I didn't even mention the actor himself. And you can't really have anybody else play that character, right? I mean, he does the performance so well. And, if they ever choose to reboot it or remake it down the road.
Well, they did.
Well, yeah, I mean, they did do that one, although he was in the end. Wasn't he in the end sequence?
After the end credit, he just
says
everybody
there's his shadow, and he says groovy,
right?
And that's it.
But thinking of that, actually, so like that is actually something that's always stopped me from totally embracing it, because as Chad, as you mentioned, kind of as also agreeing with your point, but seeing it, I guess, from the other point of view of just like he doesn't have the big foe that we often typically. I find it's much harder to come up with horror heroes that are as memorable as their opponent, if you will,
right.
And you don't really get that with Evil dead. You do in the first one, kind of, because he's a part of the ensemble.
Right.
But then it becomes like Sam Raimi's filmmaking would become much more cartoony and big,
Right.
So that I don't know. I'm in the minority that I never really loved that change. Like, so the first one I liked the most, and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I liked about the remake, that it kind of goes back to some of the Book of the Dead, the original elements that became kind of, an afterthought, I guess, as the series went on. Right. I mean,
Right.
it became all about him essentially.
Right. Yeah. And I need to watch that remake again. One of
Yeah.
these days.
It's good. I really dig the remake.
Yeah. So we will
I was
move
a
on.
huge fan.
Yeah, go ahead,
I was
Tony.
a huge fan of the TV show, and I thought to see him at his age, still being thrown around, still having the blood splattered on him, and the show, in many ways, I felt was even more graphic than the films were, and the show really went there, and he had some sidekicks, and Kelly and Pablo, and
Yeah.
you mentioned how he can be stupid, and I think we can all see a little bit of us in Ash. Like, if we were thrown into this situation, it's probably how we would react. And with Freddy Krueger, it's like the way he uses humor, I feel like is a little bit forced. But with Ash, it always seemed natural to the character and not just put upon. Like, it seemed authentic to the scene. And I always liked the way that the humor was thrown in, and he was in over his head in almost every situation,
Right.
but he would just use whatever was around him. So Ash is a very popular choice and a very good one.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, we never got that Freddy versus Jason versus Ash movie, but the comics are out there for anybody who wants to look them up.
Yeah.
So we'll move on here. Eric, what is your pick?
So for this, like I mentioned, it was harder for me to think of a worthy horror hero. But going by the rubric, I guess I was able to whittle it down, because last time we spoke, we were talking about like the morally gray heroes versus the villains who may actually be the most right in their thinking, and it really, I had to cancel myself about 5 times. So I had to revamp the list, but I went with another pretty simple one, and only in doing this did I realize that I went with Dr. Loomis for Halloween. I didn't go with Laurie Strode. I didn't even really think that it is essentially a 2-hero movie, and if we're including the entire franchise, Laurie Strode disappears for a lot of the movies. Sometimes she comes back. Sometimes they kill her off. Sometimes we forget those movies happened. Sometimes David Gordon Green gets a check and changes everything. But Dr. Loomis I also like as a character because he literally goes back with Michael since he was 6 years old. So
Right.
It's very simple. It's like one scene. A lot of exposition of just putting in that connection, that relationship they have, right? A doctor and his patient. I don't think a doctor would be that invested in that one patient, but he kind of becomes a detective, and he also kind of goes through a change as the series goes on, where he becomes more of this, I must catch this. He eventually describes his patient as pure evil, which is probably not going to pass any medical bars.
He won't win any awards. Yeah.
No, I don't think that should be in your evaluation, your diagnosis, that you're pure evil. So here, take some Ambien and 3 Excedrin or something. But he also grows with the movies, and I was happy to see that character at least brought in the Rob Zombie movie, the 2 Rob Zombie ones, and then they do something that I don't think works at all in the David Gordon Green one, the Dr. Loomis apprentice, if you want to call it that, et cetera. But I think that stood out to me. Laurie Strode is great as well, but that connection with the brother-sister relationship doesn't come in until later. And in the first one, she isn't as independent, I guess, as we were talking about with some of the other horror heroes.
No, that's a good one. That's definitely out of the box, because on the list you would just see Laurie Strode. But I like that pick. I mean, he's certainly there, like you were saying, throughout Michael almost all of his life, and he certainly is a hero in many respects. Even though despite the fact that he probably wrote in his notes pure evil. Hopefully,
yeah, and he's always great at showing up right after the action takes place. Like, he's like, oh, sorry I was late. I missed the whole shootout thing and stuff, whatever. Like, he always shows up right after Laurie's been stabbed 5 times. He's like, I brought my gun. All right, here we go. But he's always around. He's always bumbling around, hitchhiking in one of the movies, chasing his Michael Myers' niece in one of the movies. Some questionable stuff. But I do like where that character goes through the 6 movies, I guess, or 5.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we will move on to Leonard. Leonard, what do you think? What's your pick?
Well, my initial pick that I already had written up, I changed my mind because he doesn't win in the end. And I think I should have a guy as my top who wins in the end. And I went with Peter Vincent, as played by Roddy McDowall in Fright Night from 1985. And he, of course, was also in the Love the Nod from Jeremy there. So, and of course, he was in the sequel. And then there was the remake that was done where he was reimagined as a Chris Angel type magician played by David Tennant. But I'm going to primarily talk about the first movie and him in that. And Vincent is a reluctant hero that puts a new spin on the wise sage Van Helsing type of character that we've seen in other vampire movies. He's an actor who starred in these types of films before becoming a washed-up horror movie host. And at first, he doesn't believe what Charlie is telling him, that his neighbor is a vampire. And when he finds out to be true, he's scared. But he grows into the hero role, and I think that makes him more interesting. And again, I talked about that growth. And he does have the growth over the course of the first film. There's 3 very key scenes with him in that movie. One is when he first confronts Evil Ed, who had become a vampire, and he uses the cross to drive him back. And he kind of assumes that character that he had played in the movies a little bit. Then there's a scene later on where Ed winds up getting killed. And it's general emotion on McDowell's face in that scene where he's reaching out to him. He's sympathetic, beautifully acted by him. And then the other one is at towards the end when he holds up the cross to Jerry Dandridge, the vampire, and Jerry says, "You have to have faith for that to work on me." And then there's a moment, and he stills himself, and he kind of just advances with it, and it starts to work. So, one, you have that growth as a character that I talked about, and you also have that capability. Part of that is the fact that, the stuff that works in vampire movies more or less kind of works in real life as well. And, of course, he has that knowledge from playing in these movies that he winds up using. So that's my pick, Peter Vincent.
So, you know what? It's funny. I've never seen the Fright Night, the sequel. So but
there's a good scene in a bowling alley, but that's about the only really good part of the second film. It's pretty much a retread of the first movie. They just substitute Jerry's sister for Jerry.
Has anybody seen the first Fright Night more than one time? I've seen it one time, and I liked it a lot, by the way. I thought it was a really good movie,
Well, since I picked it, yeah, I've seen it a bunch of times.
Seen it a few times, yeah.
No, that's
stuff.
That's a good
Jeremy,
one.
your thoughts, because I saw that you were smiling, so it seemed like
I was. I'm going to be honest. I didn't think of him for my list.
Mm-hmm.
But immediately I was like, yep, no, that's. And there's a couple things. That character, again, it's not the person you would think of for sort of like Laurie, in that you would typically think of the kid, the primary
Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie,
Yeah.
the primary character, and not the sort of mentor assistant kind of guy. But he is such an essential part that I think it's telling that in the remake, and this is partially because of David Tennant too, but he's one of the only things that works in that movie.
Yeah, I did enjoy him in
even though it's a very different take, it still works really well. And he's all the right elements you need for a hero that is supporting, but still a major part of it, in that he's got a lot of comedy to him. He absolutely has an arc to him. That you wouldn't, if this was the character who was going to die, like, just before the final act, basically get fridged to allow the hero to fight on. You wouldn't see that kind of development from him. He's a good choice.
So Leonard, you got to tell us what your original pick was.
Yeah, my original pick was Dr. Robert Morgan, played by Vincent Price in The Last Man on Earth from 1964.
Oh, wow.
And I changed my mind because similar to Peter Vincent, it's the portrayal of the actor. This is Vincent Price, didn't get to play a lot of heroes. And it's a character that, progresses throughout the course of the film. But he doesn't win in the end. He dies. No! So that's why I was like, I should go with someone who actually wins in the end. But again, I was going more with the performance of Price and just the richness of that character. So that is what appealed to me with him. But probably 15 minutes before coming on, I was like, I should flesh out my Peter Vincent thoughts and go with that one instead.
Yeah. All right. So we will move on. Tony, what is your pick?
Now, I thought long and hard about this one, and I know I said when we were all chatting on Facebook, I was going to go with Sydney Prescott, but I wanted to go a little bit outside the box, but not too far outside the box. A recent film, 2017's Get Out, Rod Williams, played by Leonard Hayhurst. And the reason I went with him is because, as many people have said, he's the voice of the audience. He suspects that something is really wrong about what his friend's getting into. And I like that he has that smart and that savvy. And as the movie goes on, you almost forget about him. You're like, oh, he was just, the minor best friend character from early on. And then when he shows up at the end to save his friend Chris and to be there for him, I just thought it was the perfect ending and the perfect way for him to be reintroduced. And throughout the film, you see him trying to piece everything together for Chris and help him because he knows that something's amok and that something's not right. And we talked about Ash in the comedy. I think this is the best use of horror comedy that's been done in a really long time because he's not really overplaying it. And this is a character where he could easily be chewing up the scenery or trying too hard, but I felt like Leonard Hayhurst in Get Out as Rod Williams. And are we allowed to swear on here or no? Is that allowed? Or will
Sure, go ahead.
YouTube get mad at us? I mean, the TS motherfucking A line just gets me every time. And I just think it's a great movie. And I love what Jordan Peele's doing recently. And, Sydney Prescott would have been an easy choice, but he's sort of the unlikely hero. And I like the unlikely hero. He's a little bit on the chunky side. So he has that, vulnerability and you don't think of him as the hero. And then when he comes in at the end and saves the day, I think it brings on a lot of laughs. And to me, he stole the show in Get Out. And he's the voice of the audience because we're all like, you shouldn't go to that house. Bad things are going to happen. And the fact that he had that foresight and he was right all along. And the way at the end, he even says like, I told you shouldn't have gone to that house. And I like that he's smart, but he's also vulnerable because he's just a fat friend that you could see easily getting, bumped off. But he had the smarts and the wherewithal and he's not super muscular. So I went with Rod Williams from Get Out. Or Rod Williams from Get Out.
No, that's a good one. And, that's just a great movie, period. And I love all the kind of out of the box the picks that we're going with. Jordan Peele is just somebody who clearly understands tone in general, and I think you get that a lot from his direction and the way he works with his actors. Get Out is such a terrific movie. That character, as you were saying, is kind of the voice of the audience. I would agree with that totally. And he's very funny in it, and they use him wisely, like they don't overdo it, and that's kind of the key there, because the key is that you want to make sure that people are freaked out and are invested in the story that the main character is going through, but those bits of humor come in right at the right times.
It isn't for 90% of his role, it's kind of like he's trying to put together the clues, right? Like he's traveling there, or he's like, right, because sometimes I forget that character, but then because he's right, isn't he like watching house sitting or apartment sitting or something, and he's trying to find out.
Yeah, for the dog.
Yeah,
he likes his dog.
Right. So it's a lot of we come back, we keep toggling between the two. Yeah, so it's a good choice.
All right, so our last pick of our favorites. Jeremy, what is your top pick?
So I had one, but I cannot let Sydney Prescott not be praised. So I'm going with Sydney. My original pick was actually a cheat. It was going to be Dana and Marty from Cabin in the Woods as a twofer. But Sydney Prescott is, and I know people will die on the hill of Nancy or Lori. She is, to me, without question, the best final girl in horror. Final team, really, because you've got Galen Dewey as well, but I did a rewatch of the movies. I still haven't completed 4 because life got busy, but recently, and the level of appreciation that I have for those films, I feel like they are essentially perfect slasher films. And unless you can't get down with the meta aspect of it, and I respect that, but outside of that, they're basically perfect slasher films. And Sydney from the get-go is a character you want to root for. She's smart, she's resourceful, she has the history, she has the tragic history that is really emblematic of those kinds of characters. Neve Campbell is fantastic in the role from 1 all the way up through 4. Like, say what you will about 3, it is not the greatest film on the planet, but she's great in it, and she makes parts of it that shouldn't work, like the whole the ghost of the mom thing, and parts of that really aren't great parts of the movie. She makes them work. I think she contains all of those really essential elements you need of a horror character. She changes dynamically throughout the films, not always for her better, as she starts to sort of pull back away in 3 and sort of hide from the world, but each one, I think, is very much her journey, as much as Gale and Dewey are a big part of the franchise. And she's always able to survive, and she's always able to defeat to the point that whenever we post news about Scream 5, whenever I post it on 411, I guarantee there will be 2 sets of comments, and there will be nothing in between. There will be one of the heroes has to die or become a killer this time, and don't you dare do that, you will ruin this franchise. They all have to live. And I think that level of passion for a franchise that, let's be honest, has had very long breaks in it, and even, I'm all for Scream 5, but I think a lot of there is sort of an element of, why would you do it afterward? The fact that it has that level of passion, it's not for Ghostface, it's not for, if Wes Craven's not involved, it's clearly not just loyalty to him, it's the characters, and largely that's Sydney.
No, absolutely. I need to watch the Scream 4 again sometime. I've only seen that one time. I remember liking it. Of the first 3 films, I've seen them multiple times, because I know I showed my wife that franchise. She's not a huge horror fan, but I showed her those movies because I thought she would like them. And yeah, there you go. And I've never watched the series. Is Sydney in any way mentioned or a part of the series at all?
No. The first 2 seasons, so the first 2 seasons of it, there's a vague sort of, like, it doesn't have anything to do with Woodsboro at all. It's its own thing. It's fine. The 3rd season has sort of, kind of, a little bit of, but ignore it. It's absolute garbage.
Okay. But no, yeah, Sydney's a great pick, and I at one point I had thought about going with her myself. She's just that type of character where she wants to live her life, and stuff always kind of lands in her lap, and she has this attitude of her that kind of is like, ugh, I just want this to end, but she powers through, and as you were saying, you understand her decisions even if we don't agree with each and every one of them. Yeah, I mean, and she's also has enough of that badassery to her that helps a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I feel like just like with Wes Craven for the first Nightmare on Elm Street, and well, for the first Scream as well, where he's good at, like, you don't know right off the bat who the heroine is. Like, introducing him to Drew Barrymore, if you go in completely blind, like, that's going to be a big shock. And then you think Tina in the first Nightmare on Elm Street for the first half hour for you, then that goes away. And so sometimes that final girl, the lead hero, is not as apparent at the outset.
Right.
Even though it is Sydney's story, you don't know that for a while, or it's not just her story. Scream is probably one of the best examples of like an ensemble horror franchise that a lot don't have, I guess.
No, absolutely. Well, those are our picks. What do you think, guys? There's a bunch that we probably haven't mentioned. Now, one that came across the lists that I looked at, which I'll be honest, I would not have thought of this character right off the bat because I consider her more to be sci-fi. Certainly there's horror aspects of the franchise, but that's Ellen Ripley. Did you guys think along those lines at all, or were you guys thinking more like I was?
Yeah, she did not come to my mind, but yes, I think you can definitely view her and the Alien franchise, particularly the first film, in a horror bent, a horror sci-fi bent, if you wanted to.
Yeah,
also, as like an Ash like change, right? By the time the second one comes, the masculinizing of the character, in a different way, which then changes as we get to 3 and 4 and etc. But yeah, I thought of that one too. Yeah,
I did definitely. I thought about it, but honestly, it was such an obvious choice for me that I was looking for someone else.
Right. And on the whole sci-fi horror angle, I've only seen this movie once, so I might butcher the last name, but from The Thing, AJ McCready,
Mm-hmm.
he was also on a list, as well. And what's the character from Nightmare on Elm Street? I'm blanking on her name right now.
Nancy,
right.
Yep.
If George were on this, he would be very upset that I forgot that name.
Yeah, Nancy would be a good choice. Also, like going with the McCready idea and sticking with the sci-fi. Dutch from Predator.
Oh, right.
Would be one that would absolutely work, because I know there's a lot of question. People like to debate, is it sci-fi, is it horror? It certainly has horror elements.
Right.
And I mean, who says hero of anything more than Schwarzenegger's character?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as I said at the beginning, if any of you guys have any picks that you think we should have mentioned, feel free to comment in any way.
I teased at the top of the show that I had on my list who I thought was the best final girl ever, and that was Erin from You're Next.
Oh, I forgot to mention that one.
Yeah. I thought about that one.
Yeah, she's super capable. She's good in a fight. She's got survival tactics. If you're going to have a Hunger Games of like all the final girls, I think she's an odds-on favorite because of that. The only thing with me in the context of the film that kind of comes out of nowhere in the second half, like she's just there, and then all of a sudden she takes over and she has all these skills, which she explains where those come from. But very capable, and I was really impressed with that film when I saw it. And then the other name that I thought of was Burt Gummer from the Tremors franchise, as played by Michael Gross, who was a supporting player in the first film. And now, what are we up to, 7 or 8 movies and a TV show, and a new one just came out on Netflix. He's the lead character.
Yep.
And I think and he's one too where the performance of Michael Gross is very important to that character, considering how right-wing Burt is and how left-wing Michael Gross is.
Right.
That he really invests in that character. But that's a fun franchise, and he's a fun hero.
I'm glad that wasn't your top pick, because I am not very fond of those movies, but he certainly qualifies as a hero. So
I would throw out in the vein of You're Next, Grace from Ready or Not.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You haven't seen it? It came out just last year. If you haven't seen it, you're not alone. Most people didn't, and you really should. It is a fantastic film. ridiculously funny, and she is very much of that. Not in that she's not like Erin in that she's clearly skilled and trained, but she very much turns the tables in a similar sort of way.
Yeah,
I have
and
not
how
seen
lucky
it
that
yet.
those filmmakers are now directing Scream 5.
Now direct,
So
yep,
there they go. You know, they just follow the lead.
yep.
No, that's a good. I just watched that one. I want to say in the last 2 months, and I liked it a lot though.
Yeah.
No, that's definitely a good one. So that will wrap up our best picks, our favorite picks, and like I said, comment if you want, and make sure to join us next week as we talk about our ideas of who is the worst horror movie heroes. So for Tony and Leonard and Erik and Jeremy, I am Chad, and I will see you next week.